Do you think social media is making social competence better or worse?
I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think what I have observed, particularly among like, say, Gen Zers, is social media, it increases their exposure to, say, social expression, like exponentially over, say, what we were exposed to when we were young. And so I find that young people today are extremely adept of like noticing, catching memes, ideas, common threads that are showing up in different places. Like they seem extremely nimble in like managing that and like noticing that. I think so I would say they're maybe ahead of the curve in a certain sense of maybe just social awareness. I think where they might be behind the curve is a certain amount of, I don't want to say emotional maturity, but like there's a certain amount of emotional development that can only happen face to face. It can only happen when you are out with a group of friends and somebody says something that hurts you, or when you're in awkward social situations where you have to be the person who walks up and talks to a group of strangers. And I think the more people rely on social media and online platforms for their socialization, the less they are forced to be put in those situations and develop those emotional skills. And so what I notice is just people being a little bit behind the curve in terms of their social emotional development.
Yeah.
I would say what I've noticed being a Gen Zer is a lot of people, they're able to understand where a lot of people are coming from. And like you said, like reading and navigating social situations, they're pretty good at.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot of depth to them. You know what I mean? So they can go a mile wide, but not really a mile deep on anything.
That rings true. It's funny. I've just recently hired a couple of Gen Zers, and I've noticed that like they are so fucking aware of everything and like really attuned.
Nuance in conversation is like
really attuned to stuff.
How so? I'm so curious.
I don't know.
Exposure.
Yeah, I really think it's just exposure. Like
you get to see so many different people, personalities, and
points of view
on social media, and it's just constantly seeing it. And so you're aware of it, and you kind of know how to like act and react, but you don't know the depths of like where they're coming from, because it's not like, you know, in person conversation, I can see you and I see, you know, your point of view, but also we're gonna go in depth about it.
Yeah.
But on social media, it's kind of just like, oh, this guy, you know, he's like one of those funny, like fedora wearing trench coat guys that like, you know.
Could you give us an example? Like I have a problem understanding like the depth aspect of things.
Well, I have found, you know, when I've talked to Gen Zers, I have asked questions which I think when I was in my 20s would have promoted like just very thoughtful conversation. Like I've point blank asked some Gen Zers, like, what are your long-term goals for yourself? And they kind of stutter around and really get kind of uncomfortable and kind of give like a non-answer. And I'm like, wow, that's really interesting, especially because 90% of the Gen Zers I'm exposed to are super fucking smart and like really savvy when it comes to like culture and what's going on in the world. But then it's like you ask a personal question and it's just like they're kind of like stumbling around.
But you think if you asked a millennial who was the same age back then, the same question, they would give a better answer?
Dude, I used to sit around with my friends in my 20s and we would like sit there and dream of like what we were going to do in 10 years and what we were going to do in 20 years.
But that's only because you only knew of a certain like a selection of things that were possible. Whereas now with social media, you're like aware of like, okay, I could be a plumber in Nebraska, or I could be, you know, like a multi-billion-dollar media company manager. It's like, you know what I mean?
There's like this weird relationship between like as awareness expands, and the possibilities expand, the harder it is to narrow your focus. And I think that's where the depth comes in, because to have depth, you have to kind of pick a plot of land to die on. Like you have to be like, this is who I am, and this is the thing I care about, and this is the thing I'm going to defend. And the wider the options, the harder it is to choose that spot of like, this is my identity.
So do you think there are too many options right now across everything?
Absolutely. I think that is arguably the largest unspoken psychological hazard of today's day and age. And I've mentioned that in each of my books, particularly the end of that book. Like it's there's this concept of paradox of choice, which, you know, the more options you're given, the more optionality you're given, the less satisfied you are with whatever you choose. Ultimately, and you especially learn this once you start getting older, like you have to fucking choose something. Like you can't, when you're young, it's easy to kind of sit around and dream about being like a world-class expert at 5 different things. But like once you actually start working on stuff and you realize how the insane amount of effort and energy it takes to get good at just fucking one thing, you realize like, oh shit, like I really only get like 2 or 3 things in my entire life that I get to dedicate myself to. And so I need to be like very conscious about what those things are. And so, yeah, to your point, if you've grown up with literally a million options at all times, how do you pick those 2 or 3 things?
See, as a millennial, as a Gen Zer, I hate the idea that I restrict my options.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That I can only choose between some subset of choices. I feel like it's more so the distractions. Like you pick an option and you are aware of all the other options, but it's all these distractions, like these ads and like, you know, you could be a drop shipper, you could be this, you could be that, which distract you, although it is another option that you're kind of aware of. Do you think that it's possible to separate options from distractions and you're aware of all of the options?
I think distraction is another, I think I see them as two issues around the same thing, right? So it's like, even if you have chosen, you know, I'm going to be a fucking great world-class podcaster, always 10 other things going on at all times in your life. So it's like, how do you say no to all those things? How do you turn all those things off? It's another complication added on top of the initial complication.
How do you know what to pick?
I would say it's a combination of finding what you're naturally good at, finding what you enjoy quite a bit, and finding making sure it's compatible with a wider lifestyle that you want to have, right? So it's maybe you, like, I enjoy science a lot. I enjoy reading research papers. I would fucking hate it in academia. Like I would be so miserable. And so for me, I realized years ago that should probably be off the table. So yeah, I think it's a combo of what you're good at, what you consistently enjoy, and what is compatible with the rest of your lifestyle. And I guess part of that too is, you know, getting paid for something.
Yeah, I think you really said it best in a prior podcast. I really liked when you said that you know what you're really good at when it comes easy to you.
Yeah.
When other people ask you, how were you able to do that? And you just say, well, no, it was easy. I just did it. And I think for me, personal finance is something that like I've been obsessed with. And even before making YouTube videos, I was on Reddit talking about personal finance, writing these long, like, you know, analyses on random things, and I'd post it on Reddit. And people would like it.
Yeah, it's basically like what feels like play to you that feels like work to other people.